social connections. We are seeing a stronger and stronger link between our social connections and our longevity. And even more important than our longevity, in my opinion, is our health span and our brain span.
So how are women different than men when it comes to longevity?
Well, Jason, the idea that we assume that men and women are the same genetically and that their longevity would be the same, I think it's kind of a ludicrous concept just to begin with. So let's start there. Let's also add to the fact that most research and studies up until very recently haven't even included women in their studies. I mean, it wasn't until 2016, now that's pretty recent history, that the FDA told pharma companies that they ought to include women in their clinical trials. Now, think about the impact of that when we take medications. I'll just give you an example and spin it into longevity that impacted me personally. I was into trying metformin, and I'm sure your audience is aware of the fact that that's a longevity drug. That's been approved for diabetes, but many people, especially the biohackers, are all into metformin and call it one of the few longevity drugs. So I wanted to try it. And I asked my doctor. She was like, I don't know, but if you agree to do a lot of testing, we'll give it a try. So I tried it. And I will tell you that that's a drug that wasn't tested on women. And within 2 weeks, I was so sick. I had the worst gut issues that I stopped taking it almost immediately. And the gut issues continued for about 2 or 3 weeks after that. So that's just a personal example of the impact of drugs not being tested on women. And frankly, it's a lot of the research and much of the science around longevity that pertains to primarily men, and that just doesn't feel right to me. So that's one example. Another example is intermittent fasting. So we all know that intermittent fasting is kind of a great hack for keeping ourselves on a calorically restricted diet. And we know that that's been linked to longevity, but it's different for women than it is for men. Dr. Walter Longo, who was one of the people I interviewed for the book, he told me, and by the way, he is the pioneer behind intermittent fasting, who's popularized it. He told me it's very different for women than men, that women need more protein and they really should not be doing intermittent fasting more than 12 to 13 hours. So those are two really good examples of how it's very different for women and men. Let me give you one more because I could keep going. But when it comes to exercise, now there's some good news for women. Women get better effects from exercise. They can exercise less time and less vigorously and still get the same impact that men get. Now that's pretty cool. I love that one.
I love that one too. And we're going to come back to exercise because that's a big chapter for you in the book. I really like the examples you gave, specifically the first two, metformin and intermittent fasting, because one represents pharmaceutical intervention and the other is a lifestyle intervention. And I think what's so interesting about where we sit today in 2024, and I couldn't say this 10 years ago, is those two worlds are coming together in a powerful way. I think 10 years ago in our space, there was definitely many preconceived notions or resistance to anything pharmaceutical. It was lifestyle or else. And I think where we sit today is most people understand that the combination of both can be very powerful. Lifestyle may only get you 80% or 70%, or maybe for some people who are genetically blessed, maybe 95%. But when you throw in pharmaceuticals, whether it's a statin, whether it's metformin, rapamycin, the list goes on, or hormone therapy can get some people to 100%. And so from your vantage point, what do you think about that lifestyle and pharmaceutical and that tension and where the science is in 2024?
Yeah, well, let me begin by saying I am not a doctor. So
I appreciate that.
So because I am not a doctor, I really, really wanted to interview people who are top of the food chain, academics, researchers, scientists, and physicians for ageless aging. I felt like it was a necessity to get all of those points of view. And what I realized by talking to those people is that, in the past, we really did think genetics ruled. I mean, we thought that most of our health, 70% of it, was not within our control. It was our genetic destiny. And by the way, I have horrible genetics. So that did not make me happy at all. However, the most recent science, as you pointed out already, from Calico Labs, tells us that up to 90% of our health and well-being is within our control. So I personally believe, like you sort of alluded to, is that there's a combination of the two. Right now, I would say the diagnostics that are available to us to give us sort of a bird's eye view of what's going on within our bodies can help us figure out, well, what either pharmaceutical products, supplements, diet, exercise, whatever, sleep, combining these things in a way that is personalized for us. I think this idea of precision medicine is really, if not here right now, it's just around the corner. So yeah, I think precision medicine through diagnostics is a really good solution for most of us.
Well, what I really appreciate about you and your book is you're on this journey, and you mentioned metformin. A lot of people speak very highly of it, and you tried it and you felt terrible. Okay, that's interesting, and you are correct. The science isn't there for women, and so you have to be careful when you're listening, whether it's an MD or PhD, and they're singing the praises of metformin. And what about women here? And so you mentioned Calico Labs. So let's segue to telomeres. What did you learn about Calico and telomeres, and how telomeres impacts our longevity?
Well, telomeres impact our longevity, period. You don't even have to say anything more. They're the little ends pieces on our genetic makeup. And uh, if they get shorter, our life gets shorter. It's that simple. However, what we can say to simplify it for everybody, and I know that your audience is pretty sophisticated, is that what you do in terms of your lifestyle support is going to help your telomeres stay strong and long. And that's what you want. So, for instance, yeah, diet for sure, exercise. It's kind of a silver bullet. Sleep, we're beginning to realize that sleep is a very important piece of the puzzle. And when I talk about all these pieces, by the way, it's not just those things that we hear about all the time. We're hearing more and more about women's hormones and the impact that that can have on your longevity, on your telomeres. Keep going. Purpose. The idea of having a sense of purpose and meaning actually impacts our health and well-being on a lot of levels. Does it impact our telomeres? Not sure, but I bet there is a connection just from my point of view. Same thing with social connections. We are seeing a stronger and stronger link between our social connections and our longevity. And even more important than our longevity, in my opinion, is our health span and our brain span. That's what we want. We want to match our health span and our brain span to our lifespan. And, if I live to say 90, that's great, as long as I have my health and my brain functioning well.
So if we think about the basics, if you will, in terms of lifestyle modifications or interventions, and then some of the interventions that are more on the cutting edge, like taking metformin or getting your telomeres measured. Let's start with the cutting edge. What are some of the things you discovered to be interesting on your journey that were a little bit more out there and maybe not the most accessible, but nonetheless interesting?
Well, keep in mind, to put a little bit of a caveat on this, my book was published by the Mayo Clinic Press, and it went through went through 3 medical and genetic editorial reviews. So I had to be pretty clear that anything I talked about as cutting edge was in fact had the stamp of approval of Mayo Clinic Press. And we had quite a number of lively conversations around.
I can only imagine.
But there's one thing that came up that I thought was great, and I would strongly urge people to explore, and that is the senolytics that are beginning to show up. I interviewed Dr. James Kirkwood at Mayo Clinic, and he is involved with 18 different clinical trials that involve different senolytics. And I think that senolytics are going to come into their own because they clear out those zombie cells that are messing with our system and clogging up our system. We want to get rid of those. We don't want them to be there. So I love the idea of senolytics. I believe it's not necessarily, I don't know how cutting edge cryotherapy and infrared is, but I'm a big believer in both of those things. We had an infrared sauna put into our house, and the impact that it has had on our sleep alone has been rather dramatic. So and there's studies behind it. And, frankly, because of the Mayo Clinic connection that I have, I had to be sure that there were studies that really confirmed many of the things I was saying. For instance, I live in the Bay Area, so everybody's into microdosing in the Bay Area, and yeah, and there's been science
They've been into that for 60 years in the Bay Area.
at least. Yeah, my husband he was a psychologist at the Esalen Institute, which is the home of the human potential, where there's a lot of experimentation done. I don't think it was micro, but dosing. So, that's been part of, I think that microdosing can actually, from a mental health and well-being perspective, if done under a doctor's supervision, can have very positive effects. So I love that.
Well, we'll just pause there for a second because there are so many interesting things to unpack. And I don't think we've really talked about senolytics on this show. So am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, senolytics. Either that or I'm saying it wrong, and we're both saying it wrong.
What are they and why are they important? So let's go there first.
Well, some of them are prescription drugs, and most of them are supplements. And supplements have not been many of them have not gone through a lot of clinical studies. And things like quercetin uh, is being explored as something that can help clear out the zombie cells. There's a variety of different supplements, and they all some of them can work together very effectively. And I think that's part of what some of the clinical trials are about. But they're fast tracking these studies. They want to get the results. And frankly, part of the reason they want to get them is because of consumer demand. We're starting to say, hey, we want to live as long and as healthy as possible, and help us. And frankly, it's not fair because it's people who have the financial wherewithal to invest in these kinds of experimental supplements and such. But so it's creating a somewhat unequal healthcare system, frankly. But yeah, it's there and it's available.
Yes, it's definitely a tale of two cities with regards to access. So in terms of senolytics, if I'm getting this right, essentially it's the cells that become zombie cells and contribute to aging, which we don't want to happen. And they're through supplementation, lifestyle, or pharmaceutical interventions, we can essentially stop these cells from aging or reverse aging or both.
No, we can't, but we can rid our bodies of them. We can get rid of them. And I think that they can exit our bodies because once a cell that was a good cell turns zombie, it clogs up your system. To put it in the simplest terms, you want to get rid of it. You want it out of your body.
And do we know how we can assess the quality of our cells right now in terms of testing?
Well, I think that that's part of what these clinical studies are trying to figure out. Can we, and how do we do it? But I think it's going to happen, and I think it's going to begin happening rather quickly. And in the meantime, I would say, I can give you a list of a variety of them. Here's my concern about them. I actually do take senolytics, but combining them together, I think, is the secret sauce. And knowing what the combination is up for grabs. So I'm kind of using myself as a guinea pig.
Yeah, and that's a tough one. So we had near Barzilai on the show.
Yes, who is amazing.
He's tremendous, and he made a point of saying, "I'm happy you haven't had Brian Johnson on this show, who's kind of been famous for doing lots of experiments." And he communicated that he thinks he's potentially dangerous in that he's doing all these this combination of supplementation and pharmaceuticals, and he shares everything, which is phenomenal. However, the average person may look at that, and for Brian, it may work wonders, but for someone else, it could be lethal when you start tinkering at that level. And I agree. I think there's a lot of good there, but we are all individuals, and I think that's where, quercetin may be fantastic for some people, but for others, not so good. And so, yeah, just to close the loop on some of the modifications that are a little bit on the cutting edge, is there one? Is it Senolytics? Is that the one that you've experienced the greatest success with?
Well, for me personally, yes. A couple other things that have worked well for me, but before I even say that, I think that there are other things at the cutting edge. For instance, if you're dealing with disease, that's a whole other ballgame. And I don't know if you're familiar with focused ultrasound.
No.
Okay, focused ultrasound is amazing. And it also is in clinical trials right now for a variety of different.
How's that different from a regular ultrasound, which I think most people are familiar with?
Yeah, it's a focused sound wave. It's several of them that come together, intersect on bad cells, and break them up and get rid of them. So, just as an example, and I'm using this on my husband, he would probably kill me if he knew I was saying this. So, he recently was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and it wasn't an advanced case, but he needed to do something about it. He needed to take action, and he decided. We were familiar with focused ultrasound. It has been approved for prostate cancer as well as certain breast cancers, certain varieties of Parkinson's, and they're even right now doing clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease, which is amazing. So what they do is they take these different sound waves, and they focus it in on the cancer cells, and they are able to break it up. And so what's so great about it, no pain, no chemo, a 15-minute procedure. He did have to go under general anesthesia. That's the only negative. But he got up from that procedure, came home, and went to work. And he's perfectly healthy now. So, I mean, to me, it's like a miracle.
It's fantastic. Where do you think we're going to be in 3 to 5 years in terms of, you mentioned cancer and cancer treatment, immunotherapy? Is it this treatment? Like, what do you think is around the corner?
I think that there's so many amazing things. Personally, everything I hear about AI when it comes to medicine, I think it's really going to help create this whole next movement of precision medicine. And I think precision medicine, you alluded to it. I've alluded to it by saying men and women are different, but each of us individually are also very different. We need to have more precision medicine. And I think that it's evolving as we speak and very quickly.
So, you mentioned AI, and I was at an event in Miami. I think it was a Milken Foundation event, and Near was there, and Toby Cosgrove, I believe his name was, who formerly ran the Cleveland Clinic. And on the subject of AI, Toby thought that AI could be very beneficial to essentially sharing information. Yeah, I think the medical system is not good at sharing data and information for people who have, symptoms or diseases, and it could help take, essentially collect that data at scale in a way that could be very beneficial. And I think that's really interesting. And the question is, well,
There's a dark side to that, of course.
there is, but I guess maybe I'm an optimist. But what will the system allow for that? I think is the big question.
I think it will, by the way, and I think that that is exciting, and that's sort of, in my opinion, kind of the first generation of these are things we can do to improve the system that exists. So yeah, that's great. But I think we can go far further in terms. I mean, we're already seeing it in a way. It's still kind of crude, but diagnostics give us, at least a snapshot of what's going on in our bodies individually that we can then take action against.
On that note, where do you think we're still early days? And the example I'll use is the microbiome. Everything I've heard is it's so exciting.
That's my favorite example.
It's so exciting. It's all about the microbiome, but in my personal experience, the testing's really not there.
I think many physicians would agree with you. I actually have taken those tests, and what I find is that by taking them every 3 months, I do see change take place, and I appreciate that. I also love the idea of learning what my superfoods are and what foods I can take out of my diet. But I agree with you. You have to take it with a grain of salt. I mean, they're not perfection.
Jason Walkup here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show and you won't regret it. So my doctor is Dr. Frank Lipman, who does tremendous work on longevity, and we've had him on the show a couple of times. He used the exact same phrase. I did a test recently on my stool test, and one of my markers was very high for dysbiosis. I'm like, I don't get it. I feel great. And his exact words were, take it with a grain of salt. It's not like you're doing a blood test and says you have sky high ApoB.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And he said, I've seen tests where people have 4 different results on 4 different days in the same week.
Yeah, I've had that happen, and I do think I think there is such a thing as over-diagnosing yourself, and catching things at a point where they may actually be present, but that they actually can resolve themselves. It's the beauty of our bodies. I mean, our bodies are organic and try to do what's right by us, especially if we treat it right.
So I have to ask, being that your husband worked at Esalen, I have to guess there's a spiritual component that you take to heart. Can we talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that first of all, we're both really into brain health. I have cognitive decline in my family. My husband does as well, but I watched my mother go down the dark hole of Alzheimer's disease, and her mother went down it as well. So I'm very aware of this. I guess I'm pivoting a little bit over to brain health. I think that the spiritual piece is a big part of both brain health and physical health. I think, for instance, there's been a lot of studies done that tell us that meditation and finding different ways, if meditation is not your thing, but different ways to calm the mind and get to a place in your mind where you can create a sense of, well, calm, I guess, is a very important element to our well-being. It's been scientifically proven to have a link to brain health. And I love that fact because we used to think that brain health was not in our control at all, that it was all about genetics, which is, for me, a horrible reality because it means that I'm doomed. But in the last several years, and it's literally in the last several years, although we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's disease or other cognitive declines, what we do have is some tools in our tool chest that can either prevent or delay it. And I think meditation is really one of them.
Well, also another one, which I would say is a cousin of spirituality, or maybe another way to think about it is a benefit or a byproduct of spirituality is purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're 100% right. I write about purpose in Ageless Aging. I talk about this holistic bouquet of ingredients, that it's not just about the basics like sleep, exercise, and diet, but includes a lot of other ingredients, including purpose, and that these things all work together to help us live better longer. So purpose is one that I find to be incredibly important. It affects our cognitive health, our physical health, our mental well-being in terms of our mood. can affect our vitality and our energy. It is a huge, huge issue. And, most people think, oh, purpose, my God, that's such a big thing. Does that mean I have to go find I need to go create a podcast, or I need to.
You don't need any pray love moment.
Yeah, well, so you think it's got to be something big, reinventing yourself, finding a new career or whatever. It doesn't have to be that way. From the studies we've done at my company, Age Wave, what we have determined is that actually we didn't determine it. It was reported through our study, through talking to thousands of adults, older adults, younger adults, that the single best way of having a sense of purpose in your life is spending more time with family and friends. Now, so that shows you this incredible link between purpose and just even social connection. It's pretty incredible. So another thing that we found in our study, if you asked people what was the one thing you'd be willing to try to have more purpose in your life, the number one thing was adopting a pet.
So I have a couple follow-up questions there. As it relates to spending time with family and friends, did you find a certain number of friends as a threshold and a certain amount of time, or was it highly variable?
Well, it was highly variable, but what we did find were a couple of really important points. One is, and this has come out, I'm sure that many of your listeners are familiar with the idea that loneliness is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's a serious health issue. And Vivek Murthy came out, our Surgeon General came out and said there's an epidemic of loneliness in our country. What I found from the research that I did for Ageless Aging is that you don't have to have a million friends. You need to have 3 or 4 really good people, whether it be family or friends, that you can open up to, that you can spend time with. And it's not just via Zoom, although Jason, it's great to see you via Zoom. It's nice to be able to touch somebody and to hug somebody and really relate, making eye contact face to face. But there was another thing that we learned that was really interesting, and that is that there's these less close bonds that are also important. So, for instance, you go to the grocery store, let's say you go to the grocery store, and you, let's say, check out with a checkout person, making eye contact with them, going to Starbucks, making eye contact and maybe even sharing a few words with the barista. These kinds of micro communications really do add up and help in terms of our social connections.
Yes, I love that. And this is an area where I think women are traditionally stronger than men. Women are better at keeping relationships up, and men tend to take on the relationships of their spouse and aren't as good.
Yeah, yeah, that is one of the benefits of women, I mean, that we bring to the table. Men go along with it, so they kind of get the benefits that we have if we're in a couple, spouse partnership kind of thing. But yeah, we women really value our relationships, and I think that gives us a lot of power. We women, we live an average of 6 years longer than men, and it may be that these valued relationships, these social connections really help us in terms of living a longer life. So yeah, there is that.
Well, as a dad to two girls, the solo man in our household, I just believe that, females are the superior species. That's my take.
What seriously, what makes you think that?
I think childbirth plays a big role. I think women are stronger than most men. I think that men need women more than women need men in terms of relationships. So that's my view. Women tend to be, I think girls tend to be more calm as they grow up. They're more, I think this is a big thing too, emotionally resilient. Scott Galloway, who we had on the show over a year ago, this is a passion of his, young boys, young men, and being lost. And there's a statistic, and we should, the show notes will get it right, but it's something along the lines of, it's horrifying. If you take girls and boys who just horrible, but let's say have been sexually abused. The boy is 10 times more likely than the girl, or 10 or 100, like, it's to commit suicide. They just can't they can't handle it. It's just the whole situation is horrifying, but it's this idea that girls are just more emotionally resilient than boys in many ways. So that's, like, kind of my long way. I just think women are just more, but I think emotional resilience is a superpower when it comes to longevity. If you think about the ups and downs of life that no one is immune to.
Yeah, let me add to that. By the way, just to put it into the spin of longevity, let me make 2 points. One is that from studies we've done at AgeWave and some that have been done at Stanford, what we see is as people hit their 50s and 60s, they do become more emotionally resilient. They also become happier and less anxious. So that's one of the great values, I think, of living a longer life.
Yes.
And there's one other point that relates to that, and that is that there have been studies that have been done. Becca Levy from Yale did a variety of longitudinal studies in the Midwest, so they've gone on for a long time, telling us that when you had a positive attitude towards your own aging, you tended to live at least 7.5 years longer than those who had a more negative attitude about their aging.
We've had her on the show. She's fantastic, and mindset is absolutely critical. If you have this view in the back of your head that I'm going to become weak and depressed and feeble, that's going to happen. But if you believe that you can be strong and sharp, and that those bad genes, which everyone has, no, everyone's got something in their family. For you, it's cognitive decline. For me, it's cardiovascular disease. Everyone's got something. If you have the belief that, hey, those bad genes stop with me and I have the power to turn them off and turn the good ones on, you're probably going to be right. So mindset goes a long way. And I'm starting to think that we are now in an interesting time. I can't remember a decade ago where you had longevity experts who actually believed that we can live longer. And I think the interesting thing we're going to see is it actually the belief, or is it all the other stuff we're doing?
Maybe it's a little bit of both.
Right.
Yeah, but frankly, I love the fact that we can live longer. That's great news. But what my focus is, I want to make sure that my health span and those millions of women who are going to live longer than men, that our health span and our brain span can closer match up to our lifespan. Because right now, women are not doing as well as men when it comes to matching health span and brain span to lifespan. And we need to correct this.
Yes. And so something that I loved in the book was one of the titles of your chapters, Fitness 2.0, the silver bullet. It really is a silver bullet. Let's talk about that. What have you learned about fitness?
Well, yeah. First of all, I am obsessed personally with fitness, have been for a long time. But I used to just do cardio. I used to think, okay, I'm going to the gym, I'm doing cardio, I'm running, I'm doing all this great cardio. And what I've learned is that as you get older, cardio is still important, but there's 6 different kinds of exercise that become all important. Now, the most important one that you could deal with at all, that every single woman and man, but particularly women, need to include is muscle strengthening. It is, in fact, one of the physicians that I spoke to said, I think it was Carla Prado. I'm not 100% sure on that, but he said that the whole idea of muscle strength, it should be a new vital sign, as important to us as our blood pressure or our heart rate. Now, that to me was like, wow, that's pretty amazing, because we lose muscle mass as early as in our 30s. So if you have listeners here who are 30, tell them, okay, start doing muscle strengthening.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I think that has been one of the biggest fundamental shifts we've seen here. And the conversation around muscle and longevity, everyone out there, go get your InBody or DEXA scan. I think the conversation around resistance training, you need to do it. It's not, look, the vanity is great, but it's about longevity. It's about being strong and flexible, and the protein conversation and creatine. And, this is where animals just superior to plant. Nothing against vegetarians or vegans, but you got to figure that one out. It's very hard to do. I think that is just such a fundamental shift and so critical for women. It's okay to be strong, and you need to be strong. It is critical for longevity.
I think changes the kind of body type we really see as being the beautiful body type.
What I also love is it's completely changed the conversation, where a decade ago it was about losing weight and being thin, and now it's about, no, it's a body recomp. You don't have to lose weight. You actually need to eat more, specifically protein, and take that. We're conflating. We had been conflating weight with health. And it's about losing the body, letting go of the body fat and turning that into lean muscle mass, which weighs more. So all of a sudden, I don't have to starve myself. I don't have to eat salad for lunch every day. I need to eat more and protein and be full. And that's amazing. And I feel like this is so great for women, because 10 years ago, 20 years ago, with these crazy diets and eating lettuce and kale, just, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you are 100% right. And by the way, protein, the importance of protein, even bigger for women than for men. We need more protein. And yeah, I love protein too. I don't even eat red meat and I love protein.
So we're gonna have to send you ours after the show. It's amazing. So what else? So resistance training. What else?
Okay, so there's resistance training, there's cardio. We already mentioned that. You mentioned something that I think is really important, and that is flexibility. We want to make sure as we get older that we remain flexible and doing exercise, even if it's just yoga. And, what I love about some yoga poses is you're combining cardio sometimes, depending on how fast you're going, but with muscle strengthening, with flexibility, even with posture, which is another one. Posture, I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time in front of the computer and I'm continuously trying to improve my posture. It's a really big deal. Then another one is something that we don't always think about, and that is relaxation. And that's where the meditation, the breathing exercises, I use breathing exercises all the time to calm myself down, to wake myself up, to get myself energized, and even to go to sleep at night. I find that it is an incredible tool in my sleep regimen. So, yeah.
So let's segue to sleep. Before we started recording, you mentioned that basically no sleep studies have been done for women over 65.
Yeah, it's really kind of crazy. There's been a lot of great science behind sleep of recent years. And I believe that we're seeing the science of sleep become more a piece of circadian rhythm science. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. But the major studies that have been done on sleep do not include either men or women over the age of 65. And we're the ones, I'm 74. So I'm very aware of the fact that sleep becomes a huge issue as you get older, particularly for brain health, because that's when your brain has the opportunity to clean out the goop that's in there. It gets rid of the toxins.
So you mentioned your age and sleep. I think hormones, and where we're at with hormones, and specifically hormone replacement therapy for women. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so there's a lot of misinformation still, even though the conversation is beginning to open up. And I love the fact that the conversation about hormones, particularly menopause, it's really opening up. But there was a study that was done late 1990s, early 2000s, the Women's Health Initiative, that came out. It was a big study, but it was also a flawed study. And it was flawed in a variety of ways. One is the people who took part in the study were all women who never took hormone replacement over the age of 65. Maybe it was 60 or 65. I'm not sure which one it was. But so they were new to hormone replacement and didn't start until they were well, either into or through menopause. And that is a no-no. That is not something that one wants to do. Second, they used synthetic hormones. In fact, they used hormones that were derived from pregnant horses' urine. Now, if that doesn't sound gross all by itself, I don't know what is. But the study was halted because it showed, but in very small numbers, a correlation with heart disease. So, but they stopped the study. Gynecologists, many well-meaning gynecologists who went to school back then, still use that study as their go-to for saying, no, you don't want to do hormone replacement, when in fact it was a very flawed study. Now, today, menopause specialists and physicians and scientists and researchers who have really dug deep down into the changes that take place as we go through perimenopause and menopause, they all believe that taking some kind of hormone replacement is a very good idea for women. So that's the bottom line. Not for everyone. There are
It is the bottom. I'm glad you mentioned it. The tide has turned, the study was flawed, and that there are cardiovascular benefits. So it ladders up to longevity. And as you mentioned, when your hormones start to go haywire, everything's affected. Sleep, which ladders to everything, cardiovascular health, brain health, etc.
brain health is really impacted very, very deeply. By the way, it used to be, oh, these are just little discomforts. You'll get through it. That is not the case at all. These are they impact our health. They're not just discomforts or little symptoms that we'll get through. They impact our health and well-being. So you want to talk to a menopause specialist. And you can easily find those kind of doctors if if a woman listening has a gynecologist who is not on board with the latest science on hormone replacement. Bring in the studies, show them the newer studies. Now, of course, there is a caveat. Women who have breast cancer in their families or cervical cancer or other reproductive cancers in their families, they need to put up a yield sign, sort of a caution sign. They need to work with a menopause specialist, and there are solutions, and work out a great solution, because you too need a solution.
So in closing, in the book, I'll hold it up, Ageless Aging. What was the most fascinating study you came across while writing it?
Well, I'll say two things. One, when I thought about writing a book on ageless aging and focusing it in on women, I did a lot of research ahead of time to see what's my competition. And what I saw was there's a lot of books on longevity, but I did not see very many, if any, books that were really zeroing in on how it impacted women. So I think that was something that inspired me to write the book. The other thing that inspired me was that I looked at the work that was out there, and I saw lots of books on sleep, diet and exercise, even purpose. But from the studies that I've done at AgeWave and from all the experts that I've had the great privilege of talking to, what I realized very quickly was that it's not just about one thing, like diet and exercise, very important, but it's not just about those things. It's about this holistic bouquet of ingredients that work together to help us to live better longer. So, for instance, if your sleep is off, it's going to affect your brain health. It's going to affect your appetite and your vitality and your desire to even exercise. By the way, I thought that financial fitness needed to be part of the puzzle too. So these things all work together. And those two things are what motivated me to put everything together into one holistic recipe.
I'm glad you mentioned financial fitness or wellness, because if you're stressed about your finances, you're not sleeping, you're probably going to eat poorly, you're going to be stressed, you're not going to exercise. And for someone, there have been times in my life where I've struggled and it's been terrible. And so you can't really, that's one we don't talk about enough. And especially as you age, you got family, mortgage, tuition. That's very difficult. And financial stress kills.
It does. It manifests as inflammation oftentimes. and that inflammation can cause disease of all sorts. And then, by the way, you need to access the healthcare system and not have the financial wherewithal to do it in the way you may want.
That's like a whole another episode in and of itself. So if you had to summarize, what are your tips for financial wellness or things we should think about as it pertains to financial wellness as it relates to longevity?
Well, if you were to do one thing, and I'm sure that most of your listeners have done this, I would say max out your 401k. If you haven't, do it. It's real. And if you have a 401k, and if you don't, open up a Roth IRA and do that right away. Second, I would say very important, the language of financial services and finances is all bulls and bears, and it's not user friendly. And so go online, find a really good resource, and there are some, and I can give you some afterwards to include in your show notes, that spells out, and I do it in Ageless Aging. I define some of the terminology so that you can have a conversation about money that makes sense, that you understand the basic language. There's a lot of acronyms, and I mean, it's kind of like a barrier.
And if you're not on the same page as your spouse here, that's going to kill a marriage. And something else, and I'll reference Scott Galloway and Galloway again, because I just saw him speak in Miami. I think it's the numbers 1, 2, and 3. I think reasons why people divorce are all money related.
Well, actually, sex is up there too.
Sex is up there. I think maybe that, but it's like 3 out of the top 4 or 2 of the top 3 are finance related.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So that's another tip that I would give and that I talk about in Ageless Aging. You want to have regular money talks with your spouse partner, and they may create conflict short term, but they're also going to bring up the issues that may be very hidden. I know that I've had my issues around money, and because I grew up in a family that really had issues around money, not good ones. So it's a great way to air out some of your issues. Now, of course, I was lucky enough that my spouse partner was an excellent trainer and was very open to hearing all my concerns and all my fears. But they're hard conversations, but very necessary conversations.
They are, and I think the Esalen side of your husband would probably say money is energy.
Yeah, he would. You're absolutely right. I also think starting a money circle with your friends. I mean, that, first of all, great social connections. But
So what's a money circle?
okay, so get a group of friends. Let's say you have those 3 girlfriends. They can be men and women. Get together on a regular basis. In person is better, but Zoom works. And have open up conversations about money. You can even invite a professor from one of the local colleges to come and teach you something around money. The thing I love about that is that from one of the studies we've done at AgeWave, we found that women were more willing to talk about their own death than to talk about money.
Wow.
Right. And yeah, we talk about like, oh, this shirt costs whatever. I got this great purse. It was on sale. But to talk about how much we make, how you ask for promotions at work, how you better match your financial well-being to a man's. These are things we don't talk about. We need to open up these conversations, take away the taboo, if you will, about money talk.
Agreed. Maddy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. This has been great.